welcome to our August Digital Transformation webinar. How much should you really be paying for IT? This is part of our digital transformation series, which focuses on getting more out of your investment and with an eye towards the future. We look forward to joining you today, and I've brought a couple of friends along. I'm the VP of Marketing for Sourcepass, Dave Delvecchio, and with me today are Matt Brown, our Sourcepass president, and Dennis White, a Sourcepass sales executive. Matt, I'll have you introduce yourself to the team.
Thanks, Dave. We already said that before. Thanks, Dave. It's good to see everybody. I'm glad to be here. Matt Brown, the president here of Sourcepass. My role here at Sourcepass is I have all service delivery, sales, and account management roll up to me. My company was the first company that was acquired by Sourcepass, so I've been here since the very beginning, and it's been an amazing ride. So thanks, Dave.
And we came in, I think, 2 weeks after you, Matt. As I have on the slide, I was former president of Suite 3, and we were the second acquisition by Sourcepass. So yeah, it's been an exciting ride working with Matt the last 3.5 years. And joining us along the way is Dennis White. Dennis came to Sourcepass with over 7 years experience working in the MSP space and is one of our senior sales executives. Dennis, how you doing today?
Dave, glad to be here. Looking forward to going through, our presentation today, and thanks for having me. And like I said, been in the MSP world about 7 years, been with Sourcepass about 2.5. And like my logo says, I'm kind of a solution sommelier, kind of helping companies get through current challenges in the IT environment. And, it's been a journey with Sourcepass, and we're creating new things and new ways to help with those solutions. So looking forward to having this conversation.
Absolutely. And so Dennis and Matt will be joining us as we kind of move through the presentation. But in order to get started, we'll go through a little bit of housekeeping first. So first, wanted to make you aware of some upcoming events that are happening the next couple of months. In September, on the 10th, we'll have our September Learning Series webinar, which is how to personalize Copilot to your workflow. As folks are starting to integrate the use of AI in their day-to-day functions, we'll provide you some tips and tricks on how to better leverage Microsoft Copilot as part of your use of the 365 ecosystem. In September, our learning series will focus on a lightly used application that's available through the 365 subscription, Microsoft Loop. So if you're not familiar with Loop and you want to learn more, please keep an eye out for our October 8th session. You can always take a look at our future events at sourcepass.com/events. And as we share those registrations, we also tend to email those out starting at about 4 to 6 weeks in advance of the event. So keep an eye out for those events and more as we start to head into what is the peak budgeting season. Today's agenda, we're going to talk a little bit about budgeting on a grand scale because if your business has a fiscal year that matches the calendar year, usually it's right after Labor Day through the end of October that most businesses are thinking about investments for the following year. And so part of today's discussion is going to focus on budget cycles and some things that impact budgeting. Then we'll talk specifically about some funding for key people in technology and what does an average small to mid-sized business tend to pay for IT services, all encompassing from cradle to grave in the IT journey. And we'll talk about that in more detail as well. And then we're going to talk a little bit about budgeting at the end and how strategic plans and roadmaps feed into your overall IT planning and budgeting. So we got a lot of ground to cover today. We're going to do it pretty quick and hopefully with a little bit of humor. So to jump in and get started, I always like to kind of provide the backstory about what has really been one of the key drivers of refresh cycles for technology dating back to the 1960s, and that's Moore's Law. If you're not familiar, Gordon Moore was an Intel co-founder, and of course Intel has been one of the key players in computer technology since the 60s, producing the central processing units, the chips that are used in so many devices. And what Moore's Law stated was that the number of transistors incorporated in a chip would double approximately every 24 months. And that pattern held true pretty much straight through till about 10 years ago, when it wasn't doubling the transistors that were in the chip, but it was actually other technology changes that allowed processing power to continue to expand, that continued that methodology. So generally speaking, every 24 months or 2-year cycle, you would have a new generation of the processing chips that were available in IT hardware, whether it's laptops, PCs, servers, so forth. And so when you started to get to about the 5-year point, you would be through 2.5 generations of technology. And generally speaking, 5-year-old software would not run effectively on brand new computers, and new software would have a hard time running on 5-year-old computers. So as a result, what ended up happening was what became plus or minus about a 5-year usability life cycle. And so, especially when it comes to the purchasing of physical hardware, so everything from your network infrastructure devices to your desktop and mobile devices to your servers in the back end, generally you had plus or minus a 5-year life cycle. Generally speaking, the smaller the endpoint, the faster the replacement cycle has been. And but what's interesting about that is I noticed it changed as I was updating this information from a prior presentation a few years ago. It used to be that file servers were about 5 to 7 years, much like network infrastructure, and PCs used to be more or less 5 years. Notebooks have stayed 3 to 5. But what's been interesting is that file servers have actually accelerated their pace of replacement, not slowed, even though that more and more computing power is being housed on the back end as people move to things like software as a service. What's happening is the load that are being put on these servers is expanding to the point where people have to replace them a little bit quicker. Smartphones, of course, are only about every 2 to 3 years, partly because we abuse the heck out of our mobile devices. So when it comes to refresh cycles, these refresh cycle periods per device often will drive your budgeting cycles. The part of the issue is, in addition to software compatibility, there are a lot of additional issues that come up that bring dangers to running legacy technology, leading with the decreasing performance of older devices, but it also can manifest itself in other ways. And so this is one of those areas I want to bring in Matt and Dennis to kind of come back on screen and join us for this discussion. Dennis, I'll start with you. So when you're talking to clients as part of the sales process, quite often they could be talking to us about like a service engagement, but almost always it includes some sort of a refresh project as part of the discussion. So what are you commonly hearing as some of the drivers behind why folks are looking to engage on a refresh project, and what challenges they're trying to avoid?
Well, Dave, you summed it up pretty well, where, historically when I'm meeting somebody new, right, from a potential prospect trying to become a client with Sourcepass, there's obviously the key indicators of service quality, response, et cetera. But historically, one or two or more of these types of issues, aging hardware, security vulnerabilities, come into purview when we're talking about a potential partnership, right? And it's not just focused on, we want to do this because we need to change providers, right? It's also because sometimes they just don't feel confident in their current provider or their current team to tackle some of these challenges and keep quality from a service perspective. So I'm seeing a lot of changes, especially, compatibility issues is a big one, right? Where it's given the time frame right now with Windows 11, right? I have a client that's got a very proprietary software for what they do from a business standpoint. And while November 1st is the deadline, Microsoft is kind of going to get creative in the coming months of kind of adding month-to-month type SKUs. However, their proprietary platform says at the end of November, you have to be Windows 11 or this software won't work. And that's business critical to their organization, right? So there's lots of different avenues of how compatibility issues, not just from a Microsoft perspective, but from their day-to-day operations comes into play here, right? And as well as, there's teams that have internal teams where we work from a co-managed perspective with a lot of our clients, right? And sometimes the internal team wants to handle, more of the project-based relationship, and Sourcepass handles the tickets. But some of, the aging hardware, they might just want to leverage a partner like Sourcepass who has the knowledge base and can create that budget roadmap based on our client portfolio of experience going forward, right? And our expertise with certain aging infrastructure, whether it be Meraki, Sonic, et cetera, right? So I'm seeing these more and more coming into from new opportunities, and they're not like a one size fits all kind of personality with these, but a lot of it has to do with just they want to make sure they fit the right partner who can work with these types of projects and do it effectively.
Gotcha. And Matt, you've been consulting with businesses for quarter century, which sounds a lot more than what you say, 25 years.
Showing my age.
I know. Well, I've got you by about 5 years on that, so I'll show mine as well. But I think one of the things that, especially in the last 10 or 15 years, which has really been the driver behind a lot of refreshes, is the risks that security vulnerabilities can force businesses to face. If you're running outdated hardware where you can't get security pack renewals, you're kind of become a sitting duck for potential security vulnerabilities. From a security standpoint, you could even think about it in terms of how we help to keep ourselves, protected from a Sourcepass standpoint. How tightly is the relationship between having a proper security posture and staying on top of your refresh cycles tied together?
I think it's tied together right at the hip, Dave. I think that if you're running an outdated operating system on your network, you're putting yourself at risk, right? You mentioned we're not getting patches, we're not getting security updates, and it's not just on the operating system. It's at the switch level. It's at the firewall level. All of these things have an impact on your security posture. I do know that one of the things we always say when it comes to security is that typically you'll see that there's a risk that some companies are willing to take, but when it comes to end of life and legacy hardware, I think it's a risk you can avoid, right? If you plan properly, if you budget properly, if you're using Sourcepass to drive your technology roadmap, all of those things will avoid the risk, and you'll eventually phase out that legacy hardware to make sure that your security posture is at the best level it possibly can be.
And I think one of the other changes that has occurred quite a bit through the last 10 or 15 years, in part to help address some of these problems with security subscriptions, is the move towards IT as a service. And so that's a general term. It includes software as a service, which is really where this billing model became popular, that, your 365 subscription, as opposed to, buying a retail box version of Office 2010, for example. In part, these subscriptions help build in security subscriptions so that you make sure that you're always getting the security subscriptions over time. But from a budgeting standpoint, and I know this has been a particular challenge for some of our nonprofit clients, it meant they had to kind of address how some of their projects and things were funded. Because historically, nonprofit organizations could potentially get grants to help pay for capital expenses, but it wasn't until recently they were able to get grants for operating expenses. And so, in that particular vertical, there were a lot of challenges as this became more common, with more types of products being sold, not as a one-time capital expense that happened every 60 months, where you would set up a depreciation schedule and so forth, but rather something that you're paying for on a per user or per device per month basis. There are some tax advantages potentially, but I have this asterisk because I like to refer to this as the Victor disclaimer. Victor Varga is our general counsel. You do have to talk to your tax professional. We don't give tax advice, but expenses come straight out of your proceeds and you're realized in real time. Do talk to your tax professional on that. But it does add benefits to being able to stay on top of the latest security updates as you continue to fund these things on a perpetual basis rather than a one-time basis. So the real question I think a lot of our guests came into today's session is, from a numbers standpoint. What is an appropriate budget? And so these are numbers courtesy of Gartner. If you're familiar with Gartner as an advisory technology advisory company that does a lot of research and market market research. They actually came up with a number and said that the average business spends $1,221 per end user, or $891 if you measure per device. What that works out to is that it factors in that there's about 1.37 devices per user that you're going to be supporting. But from a per end user standpoint, if you start to extrapolate out these numbers just to sniff test them, if you're a small business with only 10 employees, that's $146,000 a year. If you're a 100-user environment, that's 1.45 million. So it can become a very big number very quickly. Your mileage may vary because depending on your industry and your type of technology in use, it can have a fairly wide standard deviation. For example, if you're a financial institution and you run, they're famous for running dozens and dozens of different line of business applications. So you're supporting a lot of different software in a highly regulated industry, your cost per employee is typically higher. If you're in a, let's say, call center business, generally speaking, where you might have 40, 50 people in back-end operations, but then 200 of your users are running one application on thin client computers, your cost per employee might be a little bit lower because it's a lower sophistication. But this gives you a good framework to kind of do a little bit of comparison. Do keep in mind, this is all encompassing. It includes all capital costs associated with new purchases, from acquisition and deployment through maintenance, through change management, all the way through to disposal costs on the back end. It also includes all of your services, including things like unified communications and telephony, collaboration software, mobile device management, software as a service and line applications, cybersecurity, governance, risk, and compliance if you're in a regulated industry. So there's a lot of things that get incorporated into this number, but it is at least a baseline in which you can do a little bit of cost comparison. Now, one of the challenges that a lot of businesses have is that to really manage technology properly, you need the right mix of people, process, and technology. And Dennis, I'll ask you to confirm or deny this, but generally speaking, if you're having challenges in either one or two of these three areas, you will start to have challenges with generating certain outcomes, a successful outcome when it comes to use of technology. For example, of course, if you don't have any of the three, you've got no defense from a security standpoint. But if, for example, you have an internal IT team and you're properly staffed, but you don't have the process, you can end up having inconsistent performance. And I know you and I had talked a little bit about this. That seems to be fairly common, that quite often internal teams struggle because if they're busy within trying to manage projects internally, it usually is to the detriment of their help desk. And if their help desk is getting pounded with requests, then projects usually stall. Confirm or deny, is that
yes? And one
summation?
While we're on the topic of an internal team where we're kind of an extension of the internal team, right? Those employees that are in-house, in internal IT members, they have a life too, where they take time off, they can get sick, right? And security doesn't take a break, right? So you need to have some kind of a process, whether that be through an outsourced extension like Sourcepass, to where you always have eyes on glass for those threats, just kind of using your example here a little bit. But they also take time predictably, right, for vacation. And I talk to a lot of IT managers that they're nervous taking a vacation because, who's watching the ship while they're gone, right? Yeah. And you need to make sure that you have those kind of things in place, whether through a vendor like ourselves or through process, like you're mentioning here. So.
Yeah, I had a long-time client that their internal head of IT was from Norwegian descent and would typically go on a 2-week vacation to Norway every year. And our initial engagement with them started because he was tired of having to take a pager with him. This was the pager days, to be on call 24/7 halfway across the world for those 2 weeks. And having us engaged allowed this resource to be able to visit family every year without getting calls at 2 o'clock in the morning about some sort of an IT issue.
Matt, I think to add to Dennis's point too around this is that technology is constantly changing, right? And Dennis made the point is security never stops. It's really hard for an internal team to stay on top of everything they need to stay on top of, especially when it comes to security. Not only from the day-to-day threats, but from the new technology that comes out, and also just the education around it, right? It's really hard to stay on top of it. And that's where you need a partner, somebody who's living and breathing it every day, who has a team that is responsible for keeping themselves updated and educated on what's going on in the security world. So I think that's a really important point, that it's hard for them to do that.
Absolutely. And what we tend to find is, there are those businesses that have invested in internal teams, and but what often happens is Sourcepass works with them in what we refer to as a co-managed environment, where they might have a really capable help desk but need help on the security side, and we can help supplement those skills. Whereas another company might have good security operations but have decide to outsource the help desk side for, so there's not necessarily one right answer for every business. And Sourcepass can be plugged in where it's most applicable. For a lot of businesses, though, they're willing to outsource the whole thing. And they actually find that, outsourcing in a fully managed engagement works for them. And especially for smaller environments where it's just not cost effective for a 40 or 50 person company to necessarily try to outfit an IT team, because maybe, for the cost of 2 people, we could basically bring the entire solution to the game. So, Dennis, when you're talking to different companies, do you find that those that have internal departments come in with a solid understanding of the areas in which they need help? Or do you find that through discovery and meetings and kind of the discussions that occur, that sometimes we help uncover areas that maybe they didn't even realize they were deficient?
Dave, it's very much a balance of both. Some companies come to me and say, this is where we're good. This is where our team's the strongest, right? We're great with projects. We're great with the hands-on keyboard stuff. We need overflow. We need a phone a friend type support. And then there's ones that say, hey, the level 1 stuff, the easy stuff, we just need to take that off so that we can focus on, sometimes software development. There are multiple hands and multiple hats often at times, right? And then there are some that say, we know that we need help, but we need help finding out where the best fit would be, because not all companies look at co-manage the same way. Mm-hmm. Some are very defined, right? This ticket goes to you, that ticket goes to me. And some are just like, we'll help you when we help you, right? And Sourcepass takes a very agnostic but focused from a clear line of delineation perspective, so that when we make a solution from a co-managed perspective, we're really an extension of that team. So that team does well at one thing, where they need help, that's where Sourcepass comes in. So there's times where we have to kind of find that. And I've had a recent one where it started off, they just were struggling with 24/7 support, right? They were 3 internal team members. They were trying to get around the clock kind of methodology, right, for support, and they were getting exhausted. And it sounded like in the beginning, they wanted just an extension after hours type support model, but we were able to break it down that we can do the level 1 and the level 2, which is 24/7, right? Which was the majority of the tickets we found after reviewing the last 6 months of ticket data. And we're able to say, where your team makes the most sense is the proprietary software that your firm uses, right? And they know it on the back of their hand. That's their expertise in that IT world from what they've gone through for the company. They've been with the company for years. And instead of making this just defined as you call us after hours, we were able to focus on, well, these types of level 3 issues is where your team's the strongest. And the level 1, the level 2 things that come in day to day, whether through Microsoft or connectivity issues, that's where you can leverage Sourcepass rather than just putting it in a time frame. So it's kind of a hybrid of both. Some know, and some just need to kind of understand where their strength will come from having a partner like Sourcepass.
Yeah, and to your point, I mean, we put the slide together. These are some areas where internal teams have typically voiced that they have challenges, and you're describing quite a bit in terms of building in that extended coverage and building in some cybersecurity support. But I mentioned how we're going to be doing the learning series webinar on Copilot. We're getting more and more inquiries on AI adoption. and how to bring those technologies in as well. Are there any other areas that you're having a lot of conversations lately, Dennis?
I would say from this slide alone, if there's one thing that if there's a theme here, what I'm hearing the most is communication, right? Oftentimes either, their incumbent provider may have good responses and they're able to remediate tickets effectively, but they're not getting the communication that they want, right? And if you have any partnership with any type of vendor, communication is really a key factor, right? Into open communication of how well we're doing and what does a technology roadmap even look like, right? From a proactive standpoint. So I think that hits on all four of these boxes, whether it's through the service, through our Quest platform, right? Through Sourcepass, something that really stands out in this industry as an IT leader, but also in cybersecurity, getting that data in one single pane of glass so that maybe you have an IT director that's going on vacation, right? They can kind of see how well are we doing at Sourcepass, almost harking back to coming home at the end of the day with your report card and giving it to your parents, that level of transparency and being able to see how we're doing in this effective partnership on a day-to-day basis. Even into just having dedicated roles like our strategic advisors, trying to modernize your IT and plan and predict an IT investment over a 1 to 5 year type of roadmap. And being able to sit down with you either through quarterly business reviews or even in annual board meetings, right? Understanding where technology is changing. And like Matt said, I think technology is like a moving target, right? It's never quite static. So having that constant conversation also helps us kind of go in from the technology perspective, but also how your business is changing, right? Mm-hmm. Your business goals might change in a year from certain avenues through whether it be government or regulations or just employee count, right? Wherever it has in those topics, you need to have ongoing conversations, and having those dedicated resources that can communicate effectively with you is how you have a good established partner going through all four of these pillars.
Absolutely. And another thing that I think runs through all four of these pillars is the amount of vendors that you actually have to maintain relationships with in order to cover all of those bases. And, one of the other kind of value adds when it comes to outsourcing a portion or all of your IT needs is that we have all of these relationships. These are all different tool sets that are part of our various stacks, depending on, what mix of services we're providing. But to an all-in client, I was having a conversation with one yesterday, they pretty much have every logo on the screen. And if they were trying to maintain that individually, it's brutal. We have an entire team dedicated to vendor management in order to maintain and build these relationships, in addition to product innovation, who's always evaluating for what's next and what other vendors we might need to work with. So an important component. So let's talk a little bit about some roadmaps. Dennis, you brought up this topic a little bit when we were talking about on the last topic. So one of the benefits is that it is an ongoing discussion. It's not a journey, or it's not a destination. It is a journey. And, it's best often to start with an initial benchmark, because that way you can kind of measure areas of improvement and then chart your progress over time. And it allows you a chance to reassess as time kind of moves forward. Also, I would imagine that, one of the discussion points is, it's hard to do everything all at once. So prioritization is one of the key aspects to make sure that you're focusing on areas of the greatest potential of impact. One of the areas that we help businesses kind of lead them through the process of that business prioritization. So Matt, in your role, I think you do a lot of this internally from a Sourcepass perspective, because obviously we have all of the same challenges that any of our clients do when it comes to coming up with these sorts of plans. What are some tips or guidance that you can provide folks on ways that you prioritize based on business need?
I think you've outlined it pretty well, Dave. I think you have to outline some key things here. Is what's critical, right? What's operational, and what's a nice to have, right? I think when you lay those out, that's where your starting point should be, right? You look at all the critical needs that you have within the business. You look at all the operational needs you have within the business. And then you look at the nice to haves and you develop this approach. So you take the assessment approach. You take the pieces that's going to have the biggest impact on the business. We always say here, what's going to move the needle, right? So when you look at those things and you take that phased approach to it and identifying it, in my opinion, it's the best way to move forward and identifying what the business needs. And it helps you plan, budget, strategize all around those.
Absolutely. And Dennis, when you're meeting with a new client, is there any difference in your approach on how to help them kind of focus on the areas of the greatest that will have the greatest impact?
Yeah, and when I'm meeting with clients, right, we're trying to make sure that we understand where their goals are. If I could wave a magic wand, where would you like to be in a year from now, right? And sometimes it's about making sure that the company that they're looking for from an MSP search perspective is cognitive and can do the things that they're looking for from a project base, but more importantly, streamline, making sure that there is an approach that's going to be happening from an advisory perspective, right? And having a plan with, whether it be a migration or a new life cycle hardware change, and being able to crawl, walk, run into that kind of project phases and not just all you can eat right into the beginning of a new relationship is something a lot of clients find useful in their approach, especially during a transition with a new provider, right? Because changing providers is always going to be somewhat intrusive, right? And you want to make that as least intrusive as possible to not only your end users, but to your systems, right? So being able to have that, like I said, crawl, walk, run phased approach outlines what the journey is going to look like going forward with this partner that's called Sourcepass.
Good point. And so when in terms of, for those folks that need to come up periodically with budget requests as we head into the, as I pointed out earlier, the peak budget cycle period of the year for those folks particularly that are on calendar year, fiscal year structure. If you've been in that position, it's hard to run down all of the vendors with cost estimates for things to build into your budget for the following year. So one way to kind of cut down on the legwork but still put numbers together that you can present as part of your budget request is to use what's known as ROM, rough order of magnitude pricing. It helps create a project scope and technical design, but without the level of detail that you would find in a full-blown proposal. The goal is to present something in a range with a wide range of potential accuracy, usually a 25 to 50% window of where the expectations for a project would typically lie. You can base it on experience and historical data. And I'll use as an example, we used as an example earlier, we're in the midst of a lot of Windows 10 to 11 upgrade projects. Well, for those of us that remember the 2018-2019 cycle, we did the same thing from Windows 7 to Windows 10. So quite often you can use that historical knowledge to be able to provide a framework in which you can base new ROM pricing for a similar type of project. Ultimately allows you to compare some options and justify without further planning more than necessary to be able to have those preliminary budget conversations. So the first thing you need to do is develop a high-level scope. How would you define success? And identify the major cost components. As I mentioned, applying historical data from past projects will help you quite a bit. If you have your invoices from back when you did your 2018 Windows 7 to Windows 10 migration, you could pull those out, adjust for count changes because your environment's probably larger today than it was, hopefully, if your business has been growing. Multiply by a factor of about 1.3 because our cost of living has actually increased from 2018 to 2025 by 1.29 as a COLA factor. And you can provide yourself a pretty good foundation, at least for internal budgeting purposes, going into this newest refresh project. You factor in a contingency because quite often you can have some unexpected costs that come up because sometimes changing one thing leads to another change that is a little bit unforeseen. And it allows you to have that conversation with finance to create kind of rough planning level discussions. It allows you to hopefully set some expectations. So this is just an example of a hypothetical cloud migration project and how you would assign a ROM estimate range for each one of the major cost components that ultimately lands a total of somewhere in that give or take 50% swing between 107 and 153,000. And out of experience, you're probably going to land in the 125 to 130 range almost every time. It's amazing how accurate the bell curve of these ROM estimates tend to be over time. So Matt, as you kind of look at prioritizing budgets, do you effectively use ROM or a similar type of estimating process? And do you have any tips on ways to kind of improve that accuracy that don't require tying up your entire finance team from having to put together detailed budgets and detailed estimates?
Well, Dave, I was the CFO here at Sourcepass for the first couple of years, so budgeting, big part of the role. And you're right, budget season is right here. A couple of key things that we always looked at when it came to this was, we tried to identify, fixed cost versus adjustable costs, right? That's a key thing. Looking at vendors when their increase is coming up, when their renewal is coming up, going through that negotiation period. If you are going to change a vendor, is there a notification required? And then you start to align those with what the company goals are, right? So when you align all those things together between, all of your identified fixed costs, your variable cost, your vendors, and then you align them all with your business goals, that starts to outline the framework for your budget. And then as you start to negotiate and start to plan and get the other departments involved and what their goals are for the upcoming year, that's when it starts to formulate a really good plan that you can go back to your leadership team and say, here's our plan for next year. It's based upon all these inputs. We have all this data. We've gone back. We've looked at the trailing 12 months for these vendors and this spend. And we've negotiated and adjusted and accounted for a variable change. Those were all the things we used to use in the past as a way to present a good plan.
Yeah, absolutely. And Dennis, do you find that folks come into discussions with you after having maybe done some ROM on the front end, or do you typically find that folks are coming in and part of what they're looking for is for you to provide them the financial sniff test of what they should expect from a cost standpoint?
Again, this echo my last question, a little bit of both, right?
Yeah.
While these are good estimates, right? Companies' environments are kind of like fingerprints, right? No one is typically the same as the other, right? So while, one migration may cost 50 to 70, there could be a lot of intricacies into that migration environment we have to account for, right? So most of the conversations I would say are happening based on our recommendation of what we're seeing from their current environment. And they want to get an outside look a lot of times, right? Maybe their current IT provider had suggested a lighter project and didn't account for certain things, right? So there's a lot of deep dive into the environment during our discovery process to make sure that, like I said, back at least intrusive as possible, right? Collecting all the information that makes a project successful. But yes, I would say the majority are based upon our recommendation, but there are things that they say, well, we're proposing this project with our incumbent, and we want you guys to take a look at it and see if this aligns. So yep.
Yeah, well, and it's sometimes those goalposts can move, right? I know one challenge that we ran into on a regular basis was when it's funny, I didn't think of this when we were using a migration project as the example, but quite often when you're migrating, let's say you're migrating a line of business application that runs on SQL Server, and you'll have that line of business software company be like, oh, you just got to spin up a new server, give us access to it, and we'll migrate over the application and all of the data and do that for the client. And then you get into the meat and potatoes of the project, and all of a sudden they're like, no, you have to migrate all of that data. And it's like, wait a minute, all of a sudden the level of involvement for actually doing the data swing itself has changed. That's where the contingency comes into play. If you've built in a little bit of a contingency buffer, we could actually jump in and sometimes help in areas that other vendors will sometimes throw it in our lap. And that was one example we were running into on a fairly regular basis. So, we talked a little bit about the importance of roadmaps. What's nice is again, being a journey and not a destination over time, as you start to, as a company start to get more exposure into an environment with newer clients, we can actually take a look at what's been done over time to start to project out. So if we did a big PC refresh project in 2019, we know in 2024 or 25, we're going to be needing to refresh those machines. And it allows us to build kind of reporting and estimates over time that people can actually look at, whether it's on a quarter by quarter, a year by year basis. Without regurgitating the information, if you're looking for a deep dive on how assessments and strategic roadmaps can kind of play into your budgeting process, that was actually last month's digital transformation webinar series. So I invite you to go to our website and watch Matt McCarthy, who had that discussion last month, to pick up some details on the way assessments and roadmaps can help out as well. So with that, we're reaching the Q&A section of the presentation. I forgot to point out at the outset that Q&A is on, and you can also leverage chat to send in questions. And while we've been presenting, we actually had a couple submitted to us outside of those systems that folks wanted us to address. So Dennis, this one, it looks like it should be directed in your direction, because it asks about talking to prospective clients. How many come into talks? We kind of talked about this a little bit. How many come into those talks having an existing defined IT budget versus how many seem to request their budget only after you provide a proposal?
It's a pretty even split. And the reason behind it is why Sourcepass is somewhat different from some of its competitors, I would say. So there's a great deal of clients that come in and say, this is my budget. I need a solution to fit into that. However, some see how we price our support based on the human count, not on per device, because there's many different ways IT providers can invoice for their services, right? There's per ticket, block hours, per device, right? And sometimes the budget conversation has to change a little bit on their side after I've gone through a proposal, because our human-based kind of support model eliminates those peaks and valleys that you would get with per devices. Maybe through lifecycle management, you have double, or tickets, per ticket model. In the summer, people are away and they come back and they have a bunch of tickets once they come back from vacation, right? So sometimes the reason after I have a proposal, they ask for a different budget is just because of the change on how that pricing model is reflected from what they currently have. So, and often too, a refreshing conversation, right? So it's more of an area where they can understand how they'll scale as a company with their IT spend going through support.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Matt, it looks like this next one might be for you. Seeing as you're in an executive management role, how do you use your understanding as a service provider when you have to establish budgets for non-IT vendors? So I guess that's a good question. If you're creating departmental budgets for things like HR and finance, or working with other other vendors outside of IT, do a lot of these concepts kind of work in other areas than just technology?
You can apply a lot of the same concepts to identifying what is fixed, what's variable, what's let's say a critical need, what's an operational, what's a nice to have. I think you go through the same process, because keep in mind, all of these departments that are outside of the facilities, HR, they still have the same technology needs. They still have the same vendors that they may be working with. You still go back and you look at the historical 12 months to see what we spent. You apply the same, I think, the same strategy around it, in working with the department and getting their feedback as to what they're going to need for the upcoming year. And I think if you take the same approach, you'll be able to, just add in those departments and those needs into your plan, just as you would through your technology spend.
And it was funny because I was in a peer group, and I didn't think about this till you started talking about the impact technology on all departments, right? He used to refer to technology as the thumb, meaning it's the only department that really truly touches every other aspect of your business, whether it's operations or finance or HR or so forth. That when it comes to technology, the technology budget itself isn't really a standalone budget. It's really in context of supporting the operational goals for all of the sub departments as well. And,
yeah, we have a technology line in every department's budget. There is a technology line each one. So.
Yep. We had another question posed through the Q&A section. I appreciate the Gartner per user spend graph. I've heard the best practice is that IT budget should be no more than a certain percentage of overall budget, 3 to 5% being what I've heard most common. How does that get considered? I'll take a first stab at that. I think similar to the discussion about the standard deviation, I think it can really vary depending on your business and your revenue model. If you're in a high volume, high transactional standpoint, it might drive that percentage down a little bit. If you're in a highly technical, highly white glove sort of industry, then your percentage might need to be a little bit higher from a revenue standpoint. Matt, would you confirm or deny that? do you see a different perspective?
I think that. I think in most businesses, if you look at your P&L, right, most of the time it's your employee cost is always going to be your highest, right? I think right behind that is going to be technology, right? It's going to be everything you spend on, from internet to people to tools to software to equipment. I think that's going to be your next highest spend now, right? And then probably after that, it's probably facilities and rent and property behind that. So I think that's probably, if I was to take a guess, it's probably on the lower side is what was suggested. I think when we used to work with clients and actually work with them and laying out their budgets as we do now, technology is usually the second highest spend.
Yeah, well, second or depending on your perspective. I always used to look at when I used to look at my P&L, it was always number one was, in our case, payroll. Number two was health insurance. Technology was usually right there with occupancy for like number three. But if you bundle the payroll plus all of the benefits as one category, then it would be fighting for number two.
Yeah, agreed.
That's a great point.
It's also worth noting, what industry you're in, right? If you're in a highly regulated, whether it be compliance heavy industry like SEC and FINRA or HIPAA, right? That spend is going to be somewhat dramatically more, right? Because the cost of the threat of not being compliant could be fines, right? Which no one wants to go through. And then even worse, there's the aspect of your brand, right? What is it going to cost our brand if we have some kind of a cybersecurity incident? Right. Yeah. So I think it also depends a little bit of a fluctuation, like Matt's saying, to account for those types of industries too.
And to that point, in addition, that's something, more and more industries can be considered regulated in some way, shape, or form than they were 5 years ago, 10 years ago, so forth. As the tentacles of what makes up PHI or PII, personally identifiable information, personal health information, more and more businesses are finding that maybe they weren't considered highly regulated in the past, but they are moving forward. I know one area that we saw a bunch of clients had to become much more serious, which increased their spend greatly, were those that are involved in supplying materials to the defense chain, right? Now CMMC requirements. And so I know we have a couple of clients that do everything from provide electrical components to aircraft parts. And all of a sudden, while cybersecurity was a concern of theirs, they had to start to add some of those advanced services like 24/7 SIM and SOC and in all of the policy creation as part of their governance, risk, and compliance, because it was contingent upon them continuing to be able to land the government contracts. The government forced it. So sometimes change can be thrust upon you. And for those organizations, Alicia, I think that's your name, that submitted the question, you would definitely be on the higher end of your range, because out of necessity, a greater percentage percentage of your revenue is going to have to go towards putting those new standards in place, or your revenue is going to start to go down substantially. And I think that was the great challenge, is a lot of those companies that wanted to continue to support the government, but needed to add those additional expenses in order to be able to do it. So very good. Wait a minute. Wasn't oh, that's the Survey Monkey. So you'll now notice in the chat that Kat on the back end, hi Kat, has added the Survey Monkey survey. We'd love to get your feedback on this session, and that would include feedback both on the content, if you have ideas for future subjects you'd like to see us cover, or just how the technology worked for you. We'd love any feedback you'd be willing to offer. Wanted to remind you, if you're looking for other upcoming events, you can go to sourcepass.com/events. If you ever have a question and you want an easy way to follow up with us, if you're an existing client, please feel free to reach out to your client success manager, or feel free to send an email to events@sourcepass.com. That comes to myself and Kat Irizarry, who's helping us on the back end today. And we'll be happy to point you in the right direction to have somebody answer your question. So Matt and Dennis, appreciate you helping me out today and taking part in this discussion. That was great. Hopefully everybody got good value out of this, and we hope to see you in future events moving forward. And everybody enjoy their Labor Day weekend this coming weekend. Thanks, guys.